Hi, I'm Tenley Peterson, Chair of the Arlington County Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Arlington County Budget Town Hall with County Manager Mark Schwartz. This is the County Board, Advisory Board members, and citizens who are here tonight online. For those of you that are tuning in online, please feel free to use your chat feature to share with us your thoughts and opinions.
We're going to give you this.
Okay. For those of you who are joining us online, please feel free to use the chat feature to let us know your thoughts and feelings about the fiscal year 2020 budget that the county manager is proposing. Let us know your name and which neighborhood you're from when you're sharing your thoughts. So tonight, I mentioned we have our commission leaders and our advisory board leaders here with us. And so I'd like to take a minute to go around the room and do introductions. If you can share with us your name and which commission you represent, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam Janessen from the Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission. Okay.
And I guess we're standing up. My name is Kellen Macbeth, and I am a member of the Tenant Landlord Commission.
I'm Bill Braswell, and I'm representing the Complete Streets Commission tonight.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm James Schroll, and I'm the chair of the Public Facilities Review Committee.
Hi, I'm Ginger Brown, and I'm the chair of the Joint Facility Advisory Commission.
I'm Pat Murphy, and I'm with the Civil Service Commission.
I'm John Carton. I'm chair of the Transit Advisory Committee.
We're going to go back here.
And I'm Bill Stutterman. I'm chair of the Disability Advisory Commission.
The Park and Recreation Commission.
Jim Feaster, chair of the Commission on Aging.
Sally Duran, chair of the Economic Development Commission.
Hi, I'm Eric Berkey with the Housing Commission.
Duke Banks, president of the Civic Federation.
Nora Palmetier, Urban Forestry Commission.
Marilyn Judson with the Aquatics Committee.
Mary Cornell with the Information Technology Advisory Commission.
Hi, I'm Judy Dean with the Community Services Board.
Charles Montfort, chair of the 4 Mile Run Valley Working Group.
I'm Shirley Brothwell. I'm chair of, chair of the Sports Commission.
Hi, I'm Marcia Semmel, chair of the Arts Commission.
Hi, I'm Mike Nordlilly. I'm the chair of the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority and also former head of the East Falls Church Task Force.
Hi, I'm Chris Yari. I'm vice chair of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee and also on the Transportation Commission.
I'm Jane Siegel. I'm chair of the Planning Commission.
Richard Stevenson. I'm the budget director in the Department of Management and Finance.
Hi, Kathleen McSweeney, and I'm the chair of the Career Center Working Group and also on the Planning Commission.
Hello, I'm John Bloom, chair of the Energy Committee and also here on behalf of the Environment and Energy Conservation Committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy Gabriel, president of the Crystal City Business Improvement District.
Thank you so much. Oh, we've got one more. Great. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. So let's get to the substance of this evening. Mark, earlier this month, you did a presentation for the county board giving us an early look at what the budget is going to look like. So can you go over some of the highlights about what our pressures are for the upcoming season?
Okay, so I'm going to be referring to a lot of material. I would encourage people, if you want to get the full presentation, to go online to the county website and go to the September meeting, the Tuesday recess meeting. And during the manager's report, I did a pretty lengthy presentation with a lot of slides. For tonight, I wanted to focus on a couple of issues, and then really, we're going to take a lot of questions. But laying out sort of, if you all have a budget at home, and so we have for the county our projections right now, and we're still very early in the process, that we will have, if we were to change no programs, if we were to keep everything the way it is, we would have a gap of about $9 million between our revenues and expenditures. So that is something that is somewhat typical for this time of the year. You have some cost pressures with salary increases and contracts going up, the cost of contracts. And on the revenue side, usually you have enough revenue growth to cover most of it. So the problem we have in the county, and it's been a problem we've had for the last couple of years, is that our revenue growth has been much slower than sort of the baseline expense growth. So our revenue growth projection now for the next budget is 1.5%, and our expenditure growth is 3%. Okay, that's 3% including all the items I just mentioned. Now on top of that, what the county board has done and what the community has spoken about over the last couple of years is some additional commitments. So when people ask, how did you get this $20 to $35 million gap? It's by adding pieces to it. And I felt very strongly this year we need to have a range, because $35 million is if we fill every need and we put it there with ongoing dollars. $20 million is at the very low end of that range. And for purposes of conversation, I want to be very clear, everybody, I am not talking tonight, well, I can talk tonight, I'm not including the gap that the schools have said they have, which is about $43 million on top of what I've said. So I have a little cheat sheet here, but if you start at the $9 million and you start adding pieces to it, we have an amount of money that the county board has said they would dedicate to additional pay for firefighters and police officers and people who work for the sheriff. Public safety pay, we're behind the region, and we had a long conversation with the board at the budget adoption in April about making a multi-year commitment to additional pay. So that, along with additional pay commitments to the county workforce, adds about another $5 million to that $9 million you started with. We have, in addition, we have the state has finally voted to accept Medicaid expansion, and there are additional costs that come with that. The state, unbeknownst to us, when they passed the state budget, said, here's some money for Medicaid expansion. And by the way, we're going to pay for it by taking a lot more money away from localities. So that's what they did. And the Community Services Board is very much aware of this. They're taking away essentially about $1.3 million more dollars than we're going to be getting in fiscal 20. So that creates that pressure. Some additional pressures we have are on our capital side. We did the CIP, and I know you were all riveted to that conversation, but we have some ongoing capital needs, and when I proposed the CIP, the board adopted what I consider the bare minimum for a state of good repair. It didn't mean doing any additional investments. If we were to invest at the rate I think we need to invest to bring our capital infrastructure up to sort of better standards, that's another $7 to $8 million. So you see, each of these pieces we can have a conversation about. There's also some additional funds in there for the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. If we were to keep that at the same level, we would need to add another $7 to $8 million because we funded that with one-time money. I'm getting into a lot of budget arcana here, but that and a few other pieces for fire recruit class, housing grants, that's how you start at 9 and you go all the way up to 35 million. Now the reason why we put 20 million at a base is there's some of those costs are things that we're just not going to be able to get around, like the Medicaid costs and some of the pay requirements. So with that is the scope of the issue. I fully acknowledge to everybody present that I have not talked about all those things that make up the $1.4 billion budget that are there. We can have a very lengthy zero-based budgeting conversation if we want, but I was trying to explain what the difference is from last year to this year. So I hope that answers the question. And the one last point I wanted to make, people have come to me, and they're mostly my neighbors and family members, and say, what do you mean our revenue is only growing at 1.5%? I walk around the county, it's beautiful. We have all these construction cranes going up. We have full employment. It's whatever you will say about the state of the nation, we're in a great economic situation. And I say, well, you look at all those office buildings over there, there's still a lot of vacancy in those office buildings. So 3 years ago when I became manager, the vacancy rate was over 20%. I wrote it down, it was 20.8% in the first quarter of calendar year 15. Now, the latest numbers that came out as of the end of the third quarter, which would be September, we're at 18%. So we're going in the right direction, but that's a lot of unrealized revenue. So that's the real pressure we face. So I will shut up now and let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Mark. So we have a lot of people here this evening from the commissions and from the advisory boards who have a lot of helpful ideas and advice, as well as people who are joining us on Facebook Live. So what kind of guidance and tips would be helpful for you that we could offer tonight?
Okay, so I've already started preliminary conversations with my departments, and I sent out some guidance to them, and I said, you need to come in with somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% cuts for each of your budgets. Now, I hate across-the-board cuts. I would never tell everybody, bring them in and we'll take 8% from every budget. That's illogical. So I always am trying to apply a set of principles to choose among departments and how to spend the marginal dollars. I welcome and I beseech you all to give me your thoughts about what kind of principles we should use and what kind of criteria we should use in looking at the budget. And so that is really, that's my main ask, and we are definitely in the part of the budget process right now. Having this conversation is very, very helpful to me. Once I get to December, things start to cook and congeal, so this is a really good time for you to offer your thoughts on that.
Great. So let's open up the conversation then. Who has some feedback for Mark about how he can develop a balanced budget for FY 2020? And please make sure to use the microphone so that everybody listening online will be able to hear you.
And we had one other, was Sukari joined us, so if you want to introduce yourself to.
I'm Sukari Pennock-Fitz. I don't think I need that.
Yeah, we're online.
Oh, okay. So I sit on the Arlington County Human Rights Commission, and I'm here representing the commission.
Thank you.
Okay.
And while the mic is close to you, do you have any feedback for Mark about developing the balanced budget that we need for FY 2020?
No, I think Mark's in a pretty unenviable position, and I came basically to gather information. Our commission has asked the county to look a little bit more closely at barriers to employment in the county for people who are older county residents who apply and can't seem to get interviews for jobs in the county, as well as other protected class groups. So I know there was a very little bit of money in the budget for a barrier analysis. I'm here to make sure that
it's still there, staying.
That it's still there.
It's still there, I promise you. The other point I would make is we talked a little bit about a full employment economy. Even though I say there's a full employment economy, we're doing okay, but we need to do a lot better on expanding the labor market to people who we don't see traditionally as part of the labor market. We've done that a lot. We've tried it a lot in our public safety and our emergency communications center to be a call taker. We have reached out to veterans and people who sometimes find it hard to be hired, or people with disabilities. So if you all have suggestions on that, and actually as we post, we'll still post jobs, it's the hardest thing for us is to get a diverse applicant pool. And by diverse, I mean in every sense of the word. So I'm dubbing you all ambassadors on that. That's really incredibly important to us, because by the time selections come to us, some people, I'll say like, oh my God, this is not, I don't have a choice here. It's because it's at the grassroots and where the applications happen. So we're going to maintain our commitment to that because I feel pretty strongly about it. But so you should put someone else on the spot. Somebody who doesn't really have an opinion.
Do we have someone? Oh, William?
Oh, well, following up on what Mark was just saying, I think it is worthwhile to look as far as employment goes to the commissions, because they know what the needs are, and employers are, for various reasons, not addressing those needs. So I think it might be a good idea to listen to what the needs are and try to interface with potential employers and explain the needs, and then they can recraft their jobs or maybe redefine them or look more appropriately.
Great
William,
suggestion.
can you remind us which commission you're from, please?
I'm from the Disability Advisory Commission.
Great. Thank you so much. Got some comments?
Balanced budget?
It depends on what you're
Yeah.
going to say if you want to stand.
Well,
Just kidding.
you may not like this.
No, go for
but
it.
Since you've asked each of the departments to suggest to you a budget cut of 8% for next year, I think you should do the same thing to your office.
Oh,
To
absolutely.
the manager's office. And frankly, I think you should ask the school board to look at that too, because I'm always been very uncomfortable with the fact the school board can just propose sort of any number, and the assumption they have is that the county's going to approve it. And after having lived here for 30 years, what I see in both the county and the school system is additional layers of management, usually at the higher levels, which tends to be very expensive. And I think a lot of organizations these days are flattening their management structures, not making them thicker. So I hope you look at that too.
No, I will. And I just, for purposes of conversation about my office, we had Carol Mitten was a deputy county manager. She left to take a job out in Illinois, and I didn't fill her position. I took Shannon Flanagan Watson, who was our business ombuds person, and moved her into that slot. And as vacancies occur, and I've committed because I have to actually sit in the room with the other department heads to be an example for them. So we're going to do that. Yeah, the comment on schools, I don't want to spend the whole night talking about schools, which we could do, but I will say this, which is that I would really hope that the school board and the superintendent would come up with a revenue-based budget rather than a needs-based budget, not because I think that their needs are insignificant or unimportant, but I think the way you have the conversation becomes really important. I will propose a budget regardless of what guidance I get from the board, that even if they permit tax increases, that says how you can get to where the amount of revenue we have right now, how you do that, the choices involved, and I think that's important for the community to hear. I'm hoping the school board will do that, and their budget guidance that they laid out, it wasn't clear to me that that was the road they were taking. It seems to be more of a needs-based budget, which they've done a lot, and so that's not my preference. I don't get to tell them what to do, but I hope to have a conversation and make the choices across schools and all the multiple programs we have. That makes it easier to have the conversation. It's not an easy conversation, but it makes it easier.
Who am I going to?
Why don't we go to Jane?
Hi, Jane Siegel, Planning Commission. I think you were going down the road that I had hoped to encourage you to go down. My thought was this is the second year of a tight budget and shortfall. Are there lessons learned from different bureaus as to efficiencies that they found? I think of CPHD. And I know that Bob Duffy wanted to more collaboration, more teaming. Did that help? Is he satisfied with that outcome, and did he deliver an efficiency? And are there other lessons learned from last year?
Right, so last year in formulating the budget, and I appreciate what Jane was pointing out, that there were three ways last year we had about a $20 million, it turns out when I proposed the budget, about a $20 million problem to solve. We split it into three buckets. One was cuts and efficiencies. The other was trying to take things that had been funded under the general fund and move them to other funds. Now that pushed other things out of the way. And the third one was we raised revenue. I'm constantly thanked by everybody for increasing the parking meter rates and extending the hours to 8 o'clock. I'm being facetious about that. Except for, okay. So, and we raised the utility tax. The board adopted a change in the utility tax. So your question, have we learned anything from the efficiencies? Well, I thought when I did the call this year that when the departments were asked to put together things, they would have figured out all the efficiencies. Well, that's never the case. And so the proposals coming back to me, and specifically on planning, for example, there are always better ways to do things. not what we're up against, but sort of the challenge we face as a community is that if we continue to have these budget gaps like last year, this year, and their forecasts for the next couple of years, we should be looking at changing something. I don't want to use the word fundamental, but changing how we do things rather than nibbling a little bit here and a little bit there. And I will say, with all due respect to myself and my neighbors, people in Arlington find it very difficult to say there's something in the budget that they don't like and they want to do less of. And I think of planning, for example, which is that despite my brilliant proposal to limit the Lee Highway funding for planning, it was brilliant. It's a great project, and the board has added it back, and I don't have a problem with that. But we continue to do things that we're adding requirements and obligations to staff to do things, and we're not increasing staff. That's not a complaint. I'm just saying that I don't think we've, in many cases, had a really hard conversation about what we don't want to do. So my proposals last year on efficiencies, they were, we can do this a little bit more efficiently. At a certain point, efficiencies won't cut it. They really won't. And this is one year where it won't cut it.
Thanks, Mark. So we do have a question coming in from online, so let's take that comment now.
I just wanted to bring in some of the conversation that we're seeing in the chat. So Jennifer from Leeway Overly and Tara from Donaldson Run have both been talking about schools and class size, and that they feel like the middle school and high school class size is at the right level, and they don't think that an increase in class size would be appropriate for this budget. And also kind of commenting on how schools are such a draw for this community, and that needs to be maintained as well.
Right. So we've gotten this far not talking about economic development in a significant way. So I will tell you, Sally, I apologize. You told me to start at 2 minutes into it, but it's been 15. I apologize. But we are, in lowering our vacancy rate and bringing more businesses to the county, that is so critically important as a potential way to solve the issue. So when we were courting, courting Nestle, when I was with the chief executive officer of Nestle, they gave me 5 minutes. And the first 2.5 minutes, I talked about Arlington Public Schools. And it's so incredibly important. Our school system is absolutely the rock bed of our success in a lot of ways, and we need to be figuring out how to make that clear to everybody. I always bring that up. That doesn't mean that they're immune from conversations about making choices. So it is incredibly important, and I'm not a scientist who can comment about class size, but certainly when you're looking at school expenditures, that is one lever that you look at. I'm not saying that they should be increased or decreased, but that's certainly a conversation that we could have. But I don't think anybody, we have 20%, less than 20% of our community sends kids to schools. I'm looking at one of the persons right here who has students or future students in the school, and it's incredibly important, but that doesn't mean that we can't ask hard questions about it.
Thank you. Get a comment over here from Kathleen.
Thank you. Just following up on that a little bit, Mark, I'm one of the people now who doesn't have kids in school, but a lot of us used to have kids in school, so we still have a vested interest, I think, as citizens in educating our future students. I would make a comment that it's interesting to me, schools isn't in the room right now when we're having this conversation, and they go off and kind of do their own thing, and I know they have their own process, but I think it would be really helpful if this were a little bit more transparent and united in terms of the budget conversations that we're having. In addition, I was wondering, I'd like to focus a little bit on the revenue side as well and how we lower that vacancy rate. And you're right that we've been going in the right direction. But there are all sorts of ideas, I think, about, I think Oakland recently is thinking about taxing vacant lots, vacant commercial office space, and even apartments. And is that something we could look at doing? And I know we're a deal in real estate, but what could we do to maybe get something like this off the ground?
And Kathleen, which commission are you with?
I'm with the Career Center Working Group, and I serve in planning.
Thank you.
So I can't give you a full answer because I don't really know the full legal limitations. I do know, as you point out, since we're in a Dillon rule state, when it comes to taxation of real estate, we're required to impose a uniform rate, except if there's exceptions that have been granted by the Constitution or the state legislature. I'm not aware of any authority that would allow us to have a special tax rate for vacant lots. I will say that even vacant parcels are still taxed. There's no income stream coming with them, so it's really just the value of the land, which in many cases in Arlington County can still be a considerable piece of what the tax bill is. But having said that, we really have our hands tied behind our back at trying to be creative on coming up with new ways to raise revenue. Until the legislature changes those rules, we are pretty much stuck with our real estate tax, our business and professional occupational license tax, our personal property tax. There's a few other small ones. So there's a real problem. If we had 1/10 of the flexibility that California gives its local jurisdictions, we would be having a very, very different conversation. And I mean, I hope for a miracle. I don't think this is one of the things that's going to happen in time for us. We're going to have to figure out how to get out of this without help from the Commonwealth on those kinds of tools. And I'm sorry. And the first point you made was about having schools in the room with us. I think that's a great suggestion. We have in the past had joint county schools budget forums, not in this town hall format, which I really like. So I will pass that suggestion along to the superintendent. I also want to be pretty direct about my views on this, having gone through 13 budgets. Staff can have a lot of conversations about this. I think that really it lies at the political level, finally, to determine, what is going to happen. It's the county board that gets to appropriate the funds, and the county board lays out directions, and we have a set of revenue sharing principles with the schools. As long as those are in place, and I support them being in place, the conversation is on a limited amount of territory. So, I was saying that. So, yeah, go ahead.
We got lots of hands up in the middle of the room.
Okay, so let's see. Do we want to go to Marcia?
Hi, I'm Marcia Semmel with the Arts Commission, and we don't have a lot of money. We can't make up your whole gap. I'm sorry, Mark. But one of the programs we have is a challenge grant program where we have had a tiny amount of money since 2009, not even every year, to match money that comes in with brand new private money that comes into our arts organizations. And since 2009, the county's investment, I think, of about $225,000 has been matched by about $950,000. So one of the things, and that's new money that is helping our arts organizations. So we are making a special push on the part of our mandate that is supporting public-private partnerships. And we're going to try to work as hard as we can with private entities to have them understand the value of the arts and culture. And just to follow up on the Human Rights Commission comment, the other big lens we're using in our commission this year is about cultural equity, because we're supporting all the different multicultural groups in Arlington. So we feel that cultural equity lens is as important as the other aspects of equity, such as economic equity.
Thanks so much. Why don't we take a few other comments, and then you can respond to all of them. So Duke, let's hear from you.
Yes, Duke Bank from the Civic Federation. At our last meeting, we had Katie Crystal come and visit us, and we had effectively a virtual town hall at that time. And I would suggest you maybe look at the tape that the Career Center developed, so you can get some of the comments there that were all over the map, being as that our Civic Federation has opinions, both on the left and the right. One of the things was one of the observations one of the delegates mentioned about we need to look more on investments to basically on the economic development side to bringing in. But then on the fiscal conservatives, we're bringing in the thing about more on the terms of cost containment. Yet looking at your budget or, the two biggest, one of your two biggest push points is what Charles mentioned. One was, the issue with dealing with schools. And the other one is dealing with Metro. And effectively, in both cases, is something that you don't have 100% control. And effectively, the guidance you're giving at the 8% to all of the staff, the various departments, basically in some ways, departments are being hamstrung because of the pressures, the cost pressures you're getting not only from schools but on Metro. And effectively, what type of containment can we do on those, on that side?
Great, thanks. And I think Jim had a comment?
Jim, and then one more there.
Sure, and then we'll go to online.
To speak to your request that we give you ideas about
Thank you.
principles, I would suggest that as a principle that you would look at the expenditures and identify those that most benefit the largest segment of the population, or those that benefit the most of us. For example, in infrastructure costs, and that I would include in that personnel that affect safety and security, but also simple infrastructure projects like the maintenance of sidewalks and safe crossings of intersections and proper maintenance of the up ramps on the ramps on sidewalks, so that all of us, including and perhaps especially those who need some help and some extra time in crossing an intersection, can do so safely.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. And now we have some comments from Facebook.
So a few more comments from our online chat. Kara, who was one of our participants in the budget roundtables last year, mentioned that there were a few themes from those meetings. One, good governance, including data and fiscal stewardship. Two, capital projects and their costs. And three, schools and their cost of building and education. She mentioned that she's concerned that last year we cut residential services before addressing these themes and these concerns. And related to that, there was additional discussion around reduced services and the appropriateness and wanting to discuss more a tax rate increase, mentioning that we're one of the lowest tax rates in the Northern Virginia area.
Thanks so much. Mark, do you want to take these comments?
Yeah, so there's only 10 points I think I need to cover. But I like Marcia's idea about the challenge grants, so that if I make 5 points, then you all actually have to pitch in with 10 points. That's I got the concept, right? It's a great program. As a matter of fact, I have asked in having conversations, and I don't know if we'll ever end up pursuing this more vigorously, but and see if that model could apply to other kinds of programs that the county has, where we're providing funds to people who are, who get funds from the county. We have a little bit of a, this isn't a criticism at all, we have a little bit of a historical mishmash about how we deal with nonprofits and outside organizations. And we were actually tasked by the county board 3 years ago to come up with an overall architecture for looking at how to deal with nonprofits. Every time we start on it, actually more specifically, anytime Emily and Tyler start on it, we get another request from the board to do something else. So there's a lot of good thinking in that area. I think that could I don't even say better balance the way the people end up contributing to some of those public goods, not just the government, but sort of individuals. I would just say a little bit about the comment that we got online about data and fiscal stewardship. So there are some things that are going to happen by the end of this year. We will actually have, and what are we calling it, Richard? Is it the, OpenGov, which is, give Richard the microphone here so he can tell everybody what that is.
So the plan is by the end of the calendar year, we will, to one of Mark's main priorities as county manager, data transparency and openness. And so we'll start putting more information online, fiscal information online, starting with sort of budget to actual on the expense and revenue side. And then later, next calendar year, the ability to have some more transactional data available to the public, so you can go in and see what's going on in the inner workings of county government, over the next 9 months or so. So that's what we're working on.
Right, and so one of the things that is always a challenge, which is that people are never operating with the full set of information, and so this is a step to going in that direction. What it will likely do is raise more questions then provide answers, but that's okay because Richard's home phone number is going to be at the top of the OpenGov app. Yeah, exactly. And just one other thing, and I know I want to move to conversations on some other points, which is we were talking about, and I remember from the budget roundtables, there was a comment generally, and I'm going to see if I get this right, Bryna, which is that we love it when we build projects, but geez, some of them are like really over the top. You know, why? Never heard that. Some of them, I think the term was used gold-plated. At least they weren't platinum-plated, but they were gold-plated. And so a lot. That's a very important conversation. We had a big chunk of that conversation on the capital improvement plan. I'm not saying it's irrelevant to the operating budget because one of our biggest drivers is our debt service. So it is relevant, but I'm not going to make a proposal as part of my operating budget that says we should, change something that the board adopted in its capital improvement plan. That's a conversation that will happen separately, but still, I think, a valid point. And a lot of people have a lot of very different views about the aquatics and fitness facility, which is, if you're driving on 395, God bless you, but you can actually see the land being cleared and the construction starting on that. And say what you will, we ended up in a place where we had, I think, come up with a project that I will argue strenuously is not gold-plated, and we're using different kinds of contracting mechanisms to try to be more efficient in the way we do things. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement on the way we do capital execution. And so we're bringing some of those tools to some of the other projects. I will shut up at this point because I'm talking too much.
Thank you. I actually want to ask a question about taxes and how every penny of tax brings in about $7.6 million. Can you talk about what options we have to increase revenues with regard to taxes and fees?
So for taxes, and Tenley, you're absolutely right, which is that I think one of the online commenters said that our tax rate is pretty low, and so we should look at perhaps increasing the tax rate. Absolutely, is certainly a tool that I think we should be looking at this year. But remember, for most people, if you're walking up and down the street, they don't know what the tax rate is. They just know what their bill it is they're paying. So it's based on your assessments times, the value of your house times the tax rate. There was every penny is what, 63? Is it $63 for the average resident? The average resident doesn't exist, but based on the way assessments are going. So I actually think that this is a year, and this is my view on tax increases, because I didn't propose any last year. It's going to depend on what the board gives me as guidance, and they're going to do that in November. I'm hoping, though we will see, that they carve out some room for tax increases, and I'll tell you where I think it's appropriate. I've said this a few years ago. Anytime there's something new coming along that you say this is important and we should add it and we shouldn't do it by displacing something else, I think that's an appropriate time to say the community is, that's an appropriate time to look at tax increases. So I would personally think focusing that on the additional commitments we made for public safety pay, some of the costs related to opening 3 new schools, and a few things that fall into that category, maybe the Medicaid. Some of the other things, though, I think that we need to figure out how to do that within the context of the budget. But I think this is a year, that's the year. Another lever is the personal property tax, which hasn't been increased in a number of years. And then some of our licensing taxes, those are pretty much maxed out. And we've looked at every other fee in the world. There's just very few there, and I'm not going to propose an increase in parking meter rates.
Well, so I'd like to hear from the community, our commission leaders and our advisory board leaders. What do you guys think about finding the balance between increasing revenues and cuts to services and programs? John? Can you remind us of your commission, please?
Yes, John Carton with the Transit Advisory Committee. I know in terms of revenues and expenses, sometimes it's the small stuff that can help us out too. Like, for instance, our energy use policy, idling of all the vehicles, the use of energy by the buildings. Those are kind of things where if we cut that money back, people don't really complain unless it's too cold or too hot. But it seems like, that's always an opportunity to save some money. And then on the revenue side, being Arlington residents here, we like to see revenue coming from outside sources. So we like it coming from the federal government, coming from the state, coming from, private entities. But one source I'll bring up is we've got a fantastic recreation program, and we have a lot of people that really enjoy using Arlington facilities that are coming from outside Arlington. So Mark, I'd encourage you to increase the fees that we charge the outsiders for the youth programs, the adult programs, the whole bit. Those folks that aren't paying the taxes to us.
Thanks, John. And let's hear from Bill.
If we have a $9 million gap, we could possibly fill that gap by the extra end-of-year funds that we put into program, rather. And so that's a dream to some extent.
I'm ready to comment on that, but keep going.
All right, sir. And if we have the $20 to $35 million gap that you talked about, we're talking about raising the rate around 3 to 5 cents. And then if we go up with schools, their deficit, we're talking about raising it to 8 to 10. I use these numbers because I'm an old retired coot living on a fixed salary. And Arlington has some absolutely fantastic programs for everybody. And I am ready, willing, and able to support a tax increase because I am getting far more than I pay in taxes, and I enjoy it. Then the second thing is you mentioned charitable organizations, and I work with a couple of 3 of them, primarily with the church. Mm-hmm. And we are so focused on our particular area that we don't have a lot of time to go to the Catholics or go to the Methodists and say, how can we work together better? And
don't leave the Jews out. I think it's very important. I just wanted to put that out there.
Well, I was going to mess this thing up by saying Episcopalians, but that's the kind of folk I am. But the thought process here is, how can you, Arlington, see better globally than we see at the ground level? And how can we work better together? How can you get me out of the ditch and get me into at least ground level?
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Okay,
and let's take a comment.
Because I'm full up, I have to break in here.
Okay.
So real quickly, John brought up a point, which is that one of the benefits, and I use that word in quotes, of the tax bill that the federal government passed at the end of the year was that most states have seen I call it a windfall because of the way the tax is calculated, and the Commonwealth of Virginia had a surprise arrival of about $500 million, which the state legislature in Richmond is trying to figure out how to spend. One of the things we've been very, very direct with them about is that we appreciated them taking all that money away from us and then giving back a piece of it for Metro to focus on that. You look at other sources, the state is absolutely a place to do it. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm urging you all to call your delegates and your state senators and talk to the governor about how some of that money could come back to Arlington. Recreation fees for people outside the county, absolutely something we're looking at. I think that we have some rules or some criteria we use. We're taking a look at that. Bill, thank you for bringing it up because late breaking news. Tonight we're posting online for information for the October board meeting and then for adoption in November, our closeout report. This is really getting into budget arcania, but we have tallied up all the expenses and all the revenue for fiscal year 18, which ended on June 30th. And we go through all these calculations about things where we have to take that chunk of money and put it towards things. This year we'll have about, is it 24? 22. Or $22 million, I'd say available for the county board to take a look at. I'm going to propose that some of that be set aside to increase our reserves because Moody's has basically threatened us with an inch of our life about our AAA rating. And the rest of it with the exception of a $2 million contingent, I'm going to propose be moved forward into the 20 budget. Now, that's a change because for the last 3 years I had proposed an allocation for affordable housing. I'm not proposing that this year at this point. That doesn't mean that some of that money going forward couldn't be used for affordable housing. I just think given the size of the hole we have to fill, I just didn't want to preordain what my priorities would be. We'll see how the board receives that. So that chunk of money, which ends up coming to 16 million, which is what we don't usually have that, we will start our budget deliberations with that money. Now remember, it's one-time money, and you can use it for one-time expenses. It's horrible to pay people's salaries with it and some of the ongoing costs, but it's great for some things that are only going to last a year. And then, so the last point you made about charitable organizations is a great point. Okay, done. Schwartz out.
Thanks. Ann O'Brien with the Arlington Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, but not speaking as a representative of that commission, just as a resident who has had lots of conversations with neighbors and other residents. I think that there is relatively high support for raising taxes at this point, provided that that money goes towards priorities, which I think a lot of people would argue would include schools. But then back on the commission, one of the partnership's priorities for this year and for since probably its inception is collaboration between the schools and the county, and it's a little concerning to hear people talking about the school's budget versus the county's budget, and it's perhaps time to think about new ways to do visioning to increase efficiencies in services that are common to both. So one example might be youth mental wellness. We talk about school psychologists, we talk about the resources the DHS has. How are those resources together, filling the county's needs and providing efficient services for kids and creating financial efficiencies. Parks and Rec is another, as we're talking about building new schools, and I know there is collaboration between schools and counties on issues like that. Public health. There's ways that schools and counties can work together, and it would be nice to see that emphasized and hear more about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ann. That's actually something the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission has been advising for several years now, so hopefully we can see more of that in the future. Let's go over here to Michael.
Hi, Mike Nordlily. I was with the Arlington Sports Foundation, mentioned charitable organizations, at their board meeting last night. They raised a good point about looking to increase revenue by either philanthropic naming of parks or by selling advertising in the parks. I'm not talking about NASCAR, but I think it is a good source of revenue that should be examined in order to make ends meet.
Right. So as a matter of fact, I was walking in Narda Lily Park the other day.
Okay. And do we have comments from Facebook?
Yeah, we're actually getting a lot of comments right now on Facebook, largely centered around the idea of raising taxes and, again, that trade-off that you were talking about between raising taxes or cutting services. And quite a number of people are writing in to say they have a willingness to pay higher taxes for the quality services that we have in Arlington. Stevie said that they're willing to pay a premium for the quality services that we experience. But there are ideas for other taxes beyond the property tax rate as well. Sarah, for example, mentioned that she would be willing to pay fees to use dog parks and other county services if it meant that those services could be even higher quality yet. Not a unanimous view.
And good thing Sarah didn't give her last name.
But we have a couple people who have qualified the idea of paying higher taxes if property tax rates go up, but that money doesn't go to fund schools. That seems problematic. A couple folks saying no tax increases until pet projects are off the table. And then Adam made the specific recommendation of looking at a 50-50 balance between tax increases and spending cuts.
There's something that's important for me to point out, which nobody in the room probably is aware of. On Tuesday of next week, this is all to get you to tune into county board meetings. We did this year, we do it every 3 or 4 years, we do a community resident satisfaction survey. The results are going to be released on Tuesday. And I'm not going to ask if anybody in the room actually took the survey, but we did 1,600 people responded, And I didn't take statistics in the last 30 years, I did before that, but it's statistically significant results. We added questions this year on the budget. And what was your tolerance for tax increases versus service reductions? So stay tuned to see the people have spoken, but we still have a process, so that'll be released out on Tuesday. So go ahead.
Thanks. Why don't we go to Mary?
Hi, Mary Cornell, Information Technology Advisory Commission. A couple things. One, in terms of guidance, I think one of the things for us to make sure that we're not sacrificing the future, right? That as we look at some of the things that we're investing now, we really need to ask the question, is this something that's going to position us for the quality that those who came before us made some sacrifices and some really good decisions that we are benefiting from? So let's make sure moving forward that, and obviously I'm biased, but information technology is one of the ones that I think is critical. The other thing was, I was wondering, as we've come down 3% since you've been in your role, are there some successful pieces that we can accelerate in that 3% of the vacancy rate?
So let me answer that question, because I think that's a really important question. Some of what we're seeing is structural and something that no matter how hard I would try or you would try, the economy is different. People are teleworking more, which is a good thing, and people are using smaller spaces in offices. We have a built environment that was built on a couple of premises which no longer hold. So I think that the basic vacancy rate we have will eventually take care of itself, because some of those buildings will go out of circulation and either be repurposed for residential or come down, and things will happen. So I think we have, but to your question, we have done things we've never done before. About 1 out of 10 deals that the county works on, we're actually providing incentives for, which was unheard of until 3 years ago. I think it's great that we do it in a very targeted, thoughtful way. So there's a lesson to be learned from that. And then if you listen to Victor Hoskins talk about it, see if I get it right, it's med tech, ed tech, the green tech, cyber tech, tech, whatever it is, but focusing not so much on the industries that we have traditionally looked at, but ones where we know there's going to be future growth in, like those. And we have some of the companies that have located here in the last 3 years have already moved out of their original space and grown into bigger spaces. So that's, I think, a lesson we've learned. It's really hard, given where we are now in the competitive market, to make some of our, to make our case like we did 5 or 10 years ago, which was our location simply is enough in and of itself. That doesn't work anymore. So it's a real challenge.
Right. And then the other thing, in terms of build on Ann's point, I certainly think in the technology realm there's a lot of efficiencies between school and county. I mean, there are things that we just need to change our mindset about that. So it's something for us to look at, because there's, and of course we're using Connect Arlington, so the schools are benefiting from what the county has done. But I think there are other things, other questions. We've operated on certain assumptions, so moving forward, if we're really going to have a problem with deficit, I think that's one of the areas we can look at.
Right. If I could, I just want to comment on what Ann brought up. So I view county schools collaboration as incredibly important. I will swear right now that we're doing a better job of it than we've ever done before. We have to do a lot more. There are there's two kinds of collaboration. One is we have a staff-to-staff collaboration. And I'll give you an example, and I've mentioned this to the board before, but when you have a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, an HVAC system in a school, and you have an HVAC system in a county building, pretend for a moment that they were people. They don't care if a county or a school technician comes to service them. They really don't care. Those HVAC systems are blind, they don't discriminate. And so both organizations, we have a real hard time hiring HVAC mechanics. If we took our services and put them together, we might have more money to hire. And I say this is one of those things that seems very straightforward, but what it requires is one organization and the board on the one side to say, you know what? We're okay at the schools to have the county decide when they're going to show up and fix our HVAC systems. okay? So it's doable, it makes a lot of sense. That's a question of political will, not something where I can lay out the case. There are selected instances, and I don't want to exaggerate it because I don't think there are that many, but those conversations have been had for years. The other point, which I think you made, which was on mental health services, I mean, I just went last week, and let's talk about opioids for a second. I went to an area opioid conversation. There are gaps in our services, period. There just are. When kids go to school, they don't stop having the problem when they leave school. And we have a lot of work to do on that as a community. And I think the way we do budgeting for that doesn't promote the kind of collaboration we have. We would really have to change the paradigm and say, we're not budgeting for county and schools, we're budgeting for mental health services as a separate bucket. And I think that's possible. That would take an enormous amount of energy and time and commitment on the part of everybody in this room and the community, and would change some of the rules. I don't think it's a bad thing, or I don't know what the pitfalls are, but having the conversation certainly is appropriate.
But Mark, if we do that, and it helps to reduce the opioid crisis, it is well worth every inch of work we do.
So tell me, we have some people over here that have been trying to get in, and then.
Hey, I'm Janess from EPAC, and first I just want to say that obviously a lot of the stuff that we handle is politically sensitive, so I'm not speaking necessarily on behalf of the commission. I can tell you that we're working on our priorities document tonight. We're voting right now on EPAC priorities to inform the 2020 budget, so we hope to submit that to you and the board shortly. I just wanted to plug the increase for public safety pay. That was critically important, at least as a commission. I wanted to kind of, having said that, switch to kind of private citizen mode and say that when it comes to budget efficiencies, I think there's a lot to be looked at in terms of how the public safety agencies operate. I personally I was an EMT before I came to Arlington. I worked in an all-volunteer system where there were no government-paid responders at all in the entire county that I worked in. I worked in Richmond as an EMT with Richmond Ambulance Authority. When my wife and I came up here, we had 20 years of combined EMS experience. We were not permitted to volunteer and serve as fully functioning volunteer firefighters or EMTs in the county as a matter of policy. And so there are some policy issues, I think, from an operations perspective that the county has adopted as the way that we must do business. And I would challenge the administration to look at, is there another way to go about providing these services? Officer to citizen ratios, response times, things that we take as golden rules in Arlington are not necessarily golden rules in other jurisdictions, and those drive budget and spending decisions, especially capital decisions. And then, from a staffing perspective, we're still pretty concerned about ECC staffing. I know the auditor, that was kind of the first target of the auditor. But again, there's a balance. There's staffing increases that I think could be supported. On the other hand, they handle a tremendous number of non-emergency calls. So policy changes, opening the 411 number to reduce call volume for them would be an efficiency that might, negate the need for staff increases. And then finally, real quick, with regard to schools, I'm personally concerned that, what you just mentioned, that collaboration between county administration and school administration. I know that the school system just hired an emergency manager. That position was vacant for a long time. That manager has a lot on their plate. There were grant-funded positions there and throughout the county that relate to emergency preparedness that have been taken away or moved. And I'm concerned that not from a first responder perspective, but from an overall administration perspective and planning perspective, are we funding appropriately kind of that cross collaboration that citizens will expect? Because if there's a school shooting or an incident, they're not going to divert their attention to the school board necessarily. They expect the whole of county to have handled that and planned for it.
Thank you, Adam. We have, let's hear from Kellen. Oh, do we have Mike?
Kellen Macbeth from the Tenant Landlord Commission, and my, comment or recommendation is more about process, and specifically The commissions, I know, are involved in multiple ways in the budget discussions every year, which I think is great. But one of the things that I've seen is that they're essentially asked to just advocate for their specific positions or what they most care about, and then it's left for the county to sort of take that information and say, okay, how do we prioritize this, or how do we sort of rate these, overall? And I think oftentimes members of the public or, advisory commission members aren't asked to make trade-offs or even consider those. And I think that asking that from them could be helpful in the feedback process, so that instead of just getting a list of here's, each individual group's or each interest group's priorities, we actually have to come to you and say, we recognize that if we want this, this can't happen. I think you may get better feedback than just a list of, top competing priorities.
Thanks, Helen.
Want to go across and?
Okay, yeah, so do we,
Right here.
hi, okay, there we go.
I'm with the Community Services Board, so I wanted to get back to the discussion on mental health and kids and opioids. And I agree with a lot of what you said, that it is really important, the cooperation, and not just with the schools in the county, but also, for instance, with the hospital, Virginia Hospital Center, and the whole opioids. It's a all-county effort that we have to make. Hopefully, now that the schools building and is together with the DHS, there are more opportunities, and I think they're making more opportunities to collaborate. But there's still a long way that we could go. In terms of principals, I guess my hope for the principals, and I know Arlington does do this, is the fact that the people that we serve, who are people with mental health issues, substance abuse, and intellectual disabilities, the average, I think 90% of them have an annual income of less than $9,000 a year here in Arlington. So my hope is that as we develop the budget, that we continue to pay as much attention as possible to the people who need it the most, who need the help the most. And then finally, a question on the, you were talking about the fact that there are going to be structural changes in the office buildings because there have been changes in the government and all the needs. So is there something we can do to kind of speed that up a little bit, that process? Particularly, I'm thinking in the area of turning some of those buildings into housing, particularly into affordable housing. I know that there's this group in Crystal City, We Live, or whatever. What's it? Yeah.
Hi, Tracy.
Which has these sort of very small, kind of like mini apartments that they've done.
So, okay, on that, I'm going to encourage you all, and you all should, Tracy Gabriel is here. How long have you been the executive director of the bid? Yeah, just under 2 months. So you completely got it on. You know more than she does. So, but we'll talk. She can talk a little bit about what's going on in Crystal City. That is a very developer by developer conversation, and the We Work We Live building used to be an office building. It got repurposed to residential. So I think the market is going in that direction. And I think your question was, how can we help the market go in that direction? I think that yeah, and I encourage you to talk to Jane too, or other members. We have other members of the Planning Commission here. It all gets down to the question of how nimble we are as a county in dealing with the potential of use changes in our buildings. And so we could do more on that, and I think that's absolutely the wave of the future. But there's a lot more. And the other thing is, and schools are taking a look at it, maybe some of those buildings could be used for schools. I think that the infrastructure right now, the way it's set up, it doesn't work because the stairwells and the windows don't fit right. But other jurisdictions, there's a path, there's a roadmap for looking at that, and the school board's encouraging our building official to have conversations about that. It requires some different thinking.
So I want to keep taking comments, but I also want to encourage people to share feedback they have about any service cuts or reductions that they may have on their mind. So, yeah, Jane?
About a principle, which you'd asked for in the beginning, one of the principles, and I'm not sure how this would work or how well it would work, but we do like to advertise ourselves as a tech hub, and you brought this up. Mm-hmm. Putting resources into those operations the county undertakes to attract that kind of business, skunk works, small tech companies, and that's that sort of thing. That could be a principle, because then you're bringing people that bring revenue and jobs, et cetera, to the county. So that's a principle. I also wanted to ask you, we do on the Planning Commission work with JBG Smith.
I've heard of them, yeah.
You have heard of them, and they've been knocking hard at your door, pushing their concept of, I think they call it a catalytic tax increment funding. And I wanted to hear you explain from the county's perspective how serviceable, usable, applicable, possible that is or isn't.
And can we get a couple more comments before we start responding? Just because there's a lot of hands in the room.
Okay. A lot of chatter in the Facebook.
Okay, yeah, let's go to Facebook.
Right. Joan on the Facebook feed noted that she'd like to see Arlington develop a long-term vision that would provide the basis for an annual budget. And she'd like to see the key priorities included in the vision to include a greener, sustainable community, the best schools possible, and support for neighborhood parks, libraries, and other support for a strong community. And she'd like to see the expenditures in the budget tied to the vision and those priorities. There were also a couple comments online that tied into the earlier discussion on collaboration with APS and HVAC, and also wanting to see that collaboration extend to collaboration between Arlington and other surrounding jurisdictions, such as Falls Church and Alexandria.
Thanks so much. And let's go to Sally in the room.
Sally Duran, Chairman of the Economic Development Commission. In terms of the earlier comment about principles and criteria, the Economic Development Commission spent the last 18 months developing a framework for prosperity, which I think encompasses a lot of the comments that have been presented tonight. The 4 big goals are robust infrastructure, sustainable economy, innovative workforce, and distinctive place. I encourage you all to take a look at it online. I think it would be a really good governing or guiding document for you to look at in terms of principles and criteria. I think we've talked about what's going on with the office vacancy space. AED's working very hard. The county's been working very hard to fill that space. But the fact is, everybody in the United States is trying to fill their space as well. I've just visited Albuquerque. I've been to California. My children all moved away. Everyone is trying very hard, and we are going to have to work triply hard just to even stay in place and move it down. I think the other point, in other words, what's the ask for the county? What can the county do? There has got to be a constant sense of urgency about processes and about the time frames it takes for developers to move projects through the county. I think we all share the vision of having a high-quality community, but we also have to realize that time is money and that they have choices. And then finally, I think it's been touched on, and this is a continuing theme, is this integration, not at the edges, but integration of infrastructure between the schools and the county. So thank you.
Thanks. About 3 more comments before Mark wraps up. So Nora's going to go, and then we'll go to that side of the room, and then we'll.
Wow. Okay. Nora Palmentier, Urban Forestry Commission. And as one of the principals, I would like to see that whatever is done, we consider the impact on the environment and natural resources, which really, if you really want to help the environment and natural resources, we won't be building as much, so we'll save money. But I think as we're talking about infrastructure and other things, we really do need to keep in mind that, it's our air, it's the quality, it's the land that we're on, as well as a school building.
Thank you, Nora.
There you go. Nora, right here. Thank you. Jillian?
Thank you. Jillian Burgess from the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and I believe I'm also representing the Advisory Committee on Transportation Choices. So for those of you who don't know, there is one joint committee between the schools and the county on transportation. It's not perfect, but it's a good model and it's a good start, and definitely encourage more work in that vein to get both the advocates, both the public and the staff together to talk about schools and counties' issues. But more from the Bicycle Advisory Committee, a couple comments. First of all, on the savings side, the county employees make a lot of trips around the county, and the county owns a number of cars. There's a cheaper way to get around Arlington that does work for lots of people. And the Office of Emergency Management recently showed that bicycles can be a tool that can be part of the toolbox that county staff probably don't use as much as they could. So that's an area that could probably save a lot of money. Would probably save money at the margins, I'll be honest. We've talked a lot about investment here, and I want to point out that as the county grows and the number of people here grow, naturally the number of trips people are going to take grow. And if we keep the same mode share, in other words, if the same number of trips percentage-wise are taken by car, then we're just going to run out of space. Clearly, we don't have the money to buy more space, to dedicate more space to cars, so we've got to manage that growth, and we've got to manage that transition. And bikes, transit, walking, scooters, unicycles, all of the things that we see today that move people that aren't a car are ways that we can manage and handle the increased number of trips without needing more space. So we've got to figure out a way to get from here to there where it's safe for people to travel around the county outside of their car. And I encourage the county to look, in these days of constrained budget environment, to look at small projects and figure out a way, because a lot of times the small projects like putting in a curb cut are hard to do because of the administration on top of each individual project. So that's one way that we can get a lot done, focusing on small dollar projects, but figure out a way to streamline the administration of each project.
Thank you, Jillian. I
Go.
think we've got one
from
more
Shirley,
comment.
And then we're almost at that time.
So I'll stand up since I'm way in the back of the room. I'd hate to let the night go by without at least some commentary from the Sports Commission. And I've been sitting here all night trying to think about how to answer your original question of what can you offer to me to help me balance the budget.
You were really smart, Shirley, so I'm
yeah,
glad
I
you're
let
the
everybody
last
talk
person to go.
first.
You're going to lay it out for me.
So we thought about this a lot last year, and I'm happy to forward our letter from last year to you as well. But this, in the sports world, it's a kind of two contributions to the budget. One is giving in the sense of revenues, all of the participants that are paying fees into the county, so there's a revenue stream. And then there's a piece that's a bit taking from all the facilities and the maintenance dollars for keeping those up. And I just wanted to kind of put out there in the room, we're not making any more asks of you than you're already giving to us. I think there's room in the fee structure to try to look at the revenue stream. And you've been very generous with, keeping the fields up and things like that. I do want to, though, give a nod to Michael and to the Sports Foundation and to the tradition in Arlington in the sports community to recognize the great benefit that the athletes realize from having all these great facilities and the willingness that I see across the board to contribute to that. So the Sports Foundation is trying to really stand up a mechanism by which those users can contribute to the costs. That maybe that's something that we can look at in other ways. Marcia mentioned that too on the arts side. But I just wanted to say that in the sports world, there's a real recognition that we benefit from that, and we're willing to continue to try to maintain it and keep it as much as possible. So.
Thanks so much, Shirley. And thank you to everybody this evening who has come here on their Wednesday night, spent time sharing with Mark and myself all of your feedback about getting ready for the budget challenges that we're going to have for FY 2020. I know as chair of the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, I've heard everything that you guys have said tonight, and that will be part of our guidance to the county board when we're reviewing the budget later this year. So I'd like to turn things over to Mark to wrap things up, respond to some of the questions we've heard, and say good night. Thank you.
How about if I just say good night? So first of all, I did jot down all the comments that you made. Some of them really are worth more than just a 10-second response to you, so I'm always happy. I think most of you in the room know this. I'm always happy to have a conversation with you. I just need to carve out the time. So to contact me directly, and my email is mschwartz@arlingtonva.us. Just a couple of things. I see Ginger is sitting here, and I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that we have this awesome group called the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission, which is focused specifically on the question of county schools collaboration in our public facilities. And they are a great group of people, and I encourage, to the extent that you have observations and thoughts, that you talk with her and the commission on that. I also wanted to give a shout out the point that both Marcia made, and I think that look, a few people have made. We have great support organizations in the county, like for our libraries. We have Friends of the Libraries, and I know Shirley, you mentioned the sports groups. We have Volunteer Arlington, which is a great force multiplier for the county. We get thousands of hours of assistance from it. So there are a lot of models out there. I have a lot of, I'd say my kudos really to everybody for at least responding to the question about what kind of principles we lay out there. The board is going to give us some principles, staff, to look at starting in November. And I can't believe I made it through an hour and a half and no one brought up the A word, so there we go. So I wanted to thank Tenley. I wanted to thank everybody from the manager's office and the communications staff. I wanted to thank all of you because you are in the category of people who give thousands of hours. I was joking with John on his way in. I said, we're going to double your pay. But it's really important. No solution works unless we get the best ideas that we can, and we certainly are looking for that. So thank you, everybody, and I think that's it. Thank you. Thanks, Tenley.
There is an online feedback form, so if you have additional comments, that's up live on the budget website, in addition to your advisory commissions specifically. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Tenley and Mark. And you can stay and mingle for as long as you want.
Yeah, I mean,